Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Well, tonight our subject is James Leavelle, who died recently at the age of 99. Probably the most amazing historical figure in 20th century American history that you've never heard of, but in all likelihood you have seen his picture. If we take the two most important historical dates in the 20th century in the United States, you could make a very strong case for December 7th, 1941, the Sunday when Pearl Harbor was attacked and the United States was brought into World War II, and November 22nd, 1963, the Friday afternoon the President John Kennedy was assassinated. Ask Americans of a certain age and they'll be able to tell you where they were on those 2 days. There aren't many left who were alive at Pearl Harbor and can tell you where they were then, but it was indelible in their minds, and there are fewer and fewer who were alive November 22nd, 1963, but like me, they can tell you exactly where they were when they heard President Kennedy was shot. James Leavelle was the only person who was at both events. He was a young seaman at Pearl Harbor in 1941, and he was a homicide detective in November of 1963. James Leavelle was one of the officers responsible for the arrest of Lee Harvey Oswald after the murder of policeman J.D. Tippit an hour after President Kennedy was killed, but he's more well known for a famous photograph. He was escorting Lee Harvey Oswald to the Dallas County Jail when Jack Ruby shot him. James Leavelle was handcuffed to Oswald, and you can see him react to Ruby as he shoots Oswald. A famous photograph of Leavelle turning towards Ruby as Oswald grimaces won a Pulitzer Prize and is reported to be the most published Pulitzer photograph in history. Here is the History Channel with the story of James Leavelle.
My name is James Leavelle, and I was 21 years old during the Pearl Harbor attack. I was on the USS Whitney, and it's a destroyer tender. In other words, we carried supplies for destroyers. Sunday morning, December the 7th. I woke up that morning and just walked out on the main deck when the first planes came in. They had a lead plane leading ahead of the group. When it come in, the boatswain, he had spotted that red ball. He said, "Look at that plane with the red ball on it. They must have been using it for target practice." Just as he finished that word, they dropped their bombs on Ford Island, and then that opened up like a firecracker, and he said, "Oh hell, that's Japanese," and he grabbed the phone that was nearby and blew the battle stations for everybody to get on and go to their battle stations. I was a loader on a 5-inch gun. It was made to shoot 25 to 35 miles. I didn't fire a shot that day because if we'd have pulled a trigger on that thing, we'd have killed somebody over in the city of Honolulu. I could see those ships being hit and catching fire across from us. When the torpedoes hit the Arizona, it exploded. A big plume of smoke and stuff went straight up in the air. If I was thinking about anything at all, my mind was on the men that aboard that and hoping they could escape. From 1950 to 1975, I was a member of the Dallas Police Department. I fell in love with the work in the homicide division. It put me up against a criminal, our minds against each other, and I had to dig out of him what he had done, and it became a contest. I enjoyed my time in the police department. The President of the United States was making a visit to Dallas in 1963.
President's car is now turning onto Elm Street, and it will be on.
We were listening to the dispatcher because he's giving the motorcade's location block by block. My lieutenant said, "Well, they shot the president." I didn't believe it because I had just listened to him and he was all right, but the dispatcher was carrying on about it and barking directions and what have you. So I realized he's telling me the truth. About that time, the sheriff's department reported an officer was being shot at Oak Cliff. A homicide has to go when an officer gets shot. So I called my lieutenant and I said, "Who you got covering that officer?" And he said, don't have anybody." I told him, I said, "Well, I'll take it." As a result of me going out and being assigned the murder of Officer Tippit, any prisoners that was arrested connected with his murder was also assigned to me. In fact, one of the first who was brought in was Lee Harvey Oswald. He was very polite and answered my questions. When I asked him about shooting Tippit, he said, I didn't shoot anybody. When I found out that he was going to be suspect in the presidency murder, I found out why he said anybody. On Sunday, the 24th, we were getting to transfer Lee Harvey Oswald to the Dallas County Jail. We had so many threats called in. They was going to take Oswald away from us and do all sorts of bad things to him. I said, what I'm going to do is just handcuff myself to him. So if they take him, they got to take me, and I'm not going to go willingly. Just as we was getting ready to go down, I told him, Lee, if anybody shoots at you, I hope he's as good a shot as you are. He kind of laughed. He said, oh, nobody's going to shoot at me. As we walked into the basement, I saw Jack Ruby. He was standing in the crowd of reporters and police officers. He had the pistol in his left hand pressed against his leg. I was able to reach across and catch him by the shoulder because I had jerked on Oswald trying to pull him behind me, and I was pulling him towards me. He switched the gun over to his right hand and pulled the trigger.
He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot. There's the man with a gun.
Bob Jackson snapped a photo of Lee Harvey Oswald and myself, which won the Pulitzer Prize, and it has been printed more than any other Pulitzer Prize picture. I've been involved in two historical events that people still remember, and they both happened on a Sunday. I was lucky to be a survivor. I was just doing a job in both places.
Here, Jim Leavelle and his granddaughter, who did a movie about the police officers on the Dallas Police Force that day, talk with Piers Morgan in further detail about what happened that weekend, and I would point out that very few people knew more than James Leavelle about the circumstances, and he always maintained that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin.
Well, about the only thing I can think of is I was hoping to save my prisoner, and I didn't do it. That probably goes through my mind more than anything else.
Do you feel a sense of guilt, even though you have no reason to, but do you feel that had you managed to keep him alive, we may be able to answer all the conspiracy theories that have raged ever since?
Well, no doubt about it, had we kept him alive, the conspiracy people would have had a hard time bringing up a lot of the things that they bring up. So, yes, indeed, I would have really preferred to have kept him alive.
You could have also, Jim Leavelle, been killed yourself, the way that Jack Ruby moved in and fired his gun. In that moment, what was going through your mind as he burst through that group of people and came at you?
You don't have time to think about anything like that. You have to, as a police officer, you have to act. Many people ask what goes through your mind. You don't stop and think, because if you stop and think, you've already lost. So you act, and in that case, I jerked back on him to try to pull him behind me. And at the same time, I reached over and caught Ruby by his shoulder and shoved back and down on him. And by the time I did that, all the other officers climbed on him and pushed him down to the ground.
I was going to say, you were the first to interrogate Oswald and the last to speak to him before he was killed. What was he like? How did he come over to you?
When I began talking with him, of course, I was talking to him about the murder of Officer J.D. Tippit. At that time, I didn't have a clue that he was going to be a suspect in the presidential shooting. And at that time, he answered all my questions willingly, and as soon as I asked him, he didn't hold back on anything. Of course, he didn't answer them all truthfully, but he was very calm and collected, and you couldn't imagine anybody who had just killed two people could be so calm and collected as he was.
Let me turn to you, Kate. I mean, obviously, this is a huge part of your family life, I guess. It must be something you've talked about many times. You've co-produced this movie capturing Oswald. What do you think about all the conspiracy theories, given all the research that you've now done into this?
I agree with my grandpa and the detectives in my show. I do not buy into any of the conspiracy theories. I don't think any of them hold any water. The evidence that they amassed in those first 48 hours, there would have been a conviction on Oswald, and I'm convinced of that.
And Jim Leavelle, you actually were in, I think, the ambulance with Oswald. At what stage of all this had you become aware that he had not only killed that policeman, but he'd also killed the president? At what stage before he was shot did you know that?
Captain Fritz had just came back from the school book depository where they had found the rifle and the empty holes under the window and so forth. And he'd also found out that Oswald was missing from the school book depository without permission to be gone. So he came in and getting ready to send people in different directions to look for him when somebody told him, well, the man that Leavelle's talking to has got a name similar to what he was asking about. So he opened the door to the room where I was talking to him and asked me what his name was, and I told him. And then he asked Lee, he said, where do you work? And he said, School Book Depository. And he said, well, you're the man I want. So I lost my prisoner. He took him and went into his office with him. That was the last time I questioned him. But that was the first inkling I had that he was going to be a suspect in the assassination.
I might point out that Will Fritz, who took Oswald from Leavelle, was regarded as the best homicide interrogator in the country, and he had Oswald for 36 hours and trapped him in a number of lies but didn't get him to confess. Here Leavelle talks about how a promise made to the press was in part responsible for Oswald's death.
The bright minds decided that we would transfer him in an armored motor vehicle rather than a car. Well, the threats had come in then, and I accused the television people and the radio people of having a microphone set up in our office because that hadn't been decided 3 minutes till it was going out on the air. And then the threats come in that we're going to turn that, stop that armored motor vehicle, turn it over and set it afire. So while the captain and I was having coffee, I said, well, I may burn one day, but I don't want to start it today. And if they're going to do something like that. And he wasn't in favor of it either. On the way back, as we went up on the first floor, we got into the chief. He was going somewhere. And we stopped and talked to him, and the cap reiterated his objection to that motor vehicle. And he felt steadfast to it. I told him, I said, Chief, you know that elevator from the jail stops on this floor because they had the city courts on that floor, and they'd bring the prisoners, these ne'er-do-wells would get in trouble and come bring them down for court, that stop there. I said, you know, we could take him out here on this floor, put him in a car on Main Street, and be in the county jail before they ever leave. And his exact words to me were, Leavelle, I have given them my word that they can film the transfer, and I'm going to keep it. I don't want them to think that we abused him, mistreated him, or anything, and this is the best way to do it, let them film it. Well, I could see where he's coming from, but if he'd listened to old detective one time, Oswald could still be down there convicted and having his appeals going. I rode an ambulance with him and tried to get some feeling on his arm, but pulse, but never did. I went into the operating room with him and told the doctors, I said, before you do anything else, I want that bullet out of it. So he rolled him over a little bit, pitched it up, and hit it with a scalpel. It popped out into a tray that a nurse was holding. I immediately took out my trusty pocket knife. It had a sharp point on it, and I said, I want you to scratch your initial in the butt end of this bullet while I watch, because you and I will be testifying this is a bullet that come out of Lee Harvey Oswald, and which I did several times, and I know she did at least once.
Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. As a final tribute to Jim Leavelle, we're going to play the song that was #1 on the weekend of November 22nd, 1963. By the way, in case you're wondering, the song that was #1 on the weekend of December 7th, 1941 was Chattanooga Choo Choo by Glenn Miller. But there's a little better story to the song that was #1 on November 22nd through November 24th, 1963. The name of the song was I'm Leaving It All Up to You. It's been done by other people. It's been done notably by Donnie and Marie and also by Linda Ronstadt. But the #1 version in 1963 was by Dale and Grace. They were sort of a crossover duo who hit it big once. With their #1 song, they were touring the country with Dick Clark's Caravan of Stars. And on November 22nd, 1963, they happened to be in Dallas, specifically at the Dallas Memorial Auditorium, which is only about 3 blocks from Dealey Plaza. And just before 12:30 that afternoon, Dale and Grace came out of the Dallas Memorial Auditorium to get a glimpse of the motorcade of President Kennedy and his wife, Jacqueline. They waved to the president and his wife right as the motorcade was turning onto Houston Street. Dale's name, by the way, was Dale Houston, just a coincidence. And then they went back inside. It wasn't 2 minutes later before Lee Harvey Oswald fired the 3 shots that changed the world and are responsible for this podcast. So we'll leave Jim Leavelle, a reluctant American hero, with I'm Leaving It All Up to You by Dale and Grace.
I'm leaving it all up to you.